William Saunderson-Meyer is well known by the members of the BizNews community for his the longest running political column in South Africa. William, or better known as WSM, is going to be giving us an update now on his latest column, which we published on BizNews and has been extremely well read. Eskom, a sideshow compared with the collapse of the South African Police Service and the NPA. Quite a headline.
Yes, well, that's not in any way to gainsay the enormous effect that Eskom has on our lives and on our economy and in the destruction and dismantling of our institutional structures. But what I'm basically arguing is that behind Eskom, at the root of Eskom, lies a problem of criminality. Whether Andre de Ruyter, the former CEO, was somewhat naive and misled in his investigation doesn't really matter. The fact is, corruption has been extremely well documented at Eskom. So a large part of the Eskom collapse is a criminal problem. Aside from that, what we have is that Eskom can be remedied. Money can be thrown in it, and at least South Africa can probably live through till after the general election. And quite frankly, the ANC doesn't give a damn if anything else happens after that. What they're really interested in is what happens in some period between May and August next year. Far more serious for our life and limb in South Africa is the dysfunction of the South African Police Service, the dysfunction in the National Prosecuting Authority, and allied to that, a court system which really isn't working very well. Many of the judges, or certainly several judges, more than one would expect in any system, are not operating very well. Their judgments are being reversed. In the lower courts, judgments are not being delivered. Magistrates are often overruled on appeal. It's a system that isn't working very well, but the critical things are police, NPA, and their failures are far more serious than Eskom is.
This is a real deep concern. At the BizNews conference, Ian Cameron, who spends his life going into poor areas to help abuse or people who have been women primarily and children who have been violently abused, had a lot to say about the police service, including, he put a picture up there which was sent out by a gang member sitting in the police vehicle that is used by the gang unit, or the unit that was supposed to sort out gangs. And he said that just tells you everything, that one picture. One of the things, though, and I always like to look on the upside, William, is in the Western Cape, this LEAP service, and I got some information from them today. They distributed their latest numbers, and they are seeming to getting somewhere where you have got police being devolved into the province. Certainly in the Western Cape, they arrested over 1,000 people in April, confiscated 26 firearms. It's a drop in the ocean for the number of firearms that are out there. But they are, more importantly, they've got a target, and they're targeting to reduce the murder rate by 50% by 2029. So there's some target, some process that seems to be involved as far as the Western Cape government is concerned. But generally speaking, we don't see this kind of effort being replicated elsewhere.
Well, we do in the sense that in Gauteng, the Premier, Panyaza Lesufi, has launched his own version of LEAP, which is, I can't remember what its formal name is, but rather sinisterly, it's now being referred to in the media as the Amapanyaza, which is basically Panyaza's men, Panyaza's gang, Panyaza's warriors. And that's the other side of community policing. Experts agree is essential. And one of the failures, apart from the crime intelligence failure of the South African Police Services, is has been its inability to provide community services, which is why one has vigilante groups going around and meting out swift and brutal justice, which almost unanimously meets with approval on social media. It's an indication of the state of siege that many people live in, especially in the poorer communities where they don't have 24-hour electricity that is provided to cabinet ministers, and they don't have blue light brigades looking after them, and they don't have private security looking after them. So LEAP is a great idea, but it really does depend how it's implemented. And we don't know yet how the amapanyaza are going to operate. But in the release announcing that they were now putting 4,000 boots on the ground, was they were going to invade these areas. Now, when you're talking about invading the areas that you're supposed to be looking after, it's not a good sign. So one must temper the need to increase policing, and there's a lot of resistance to community policing. You'll know that old Police Minister Becky Cele has done everything possible to retard efforts by the Western Cape to move on community policing. He sees it as a threat, and it is a threat. Every success for community policing is another spotlight on the failure of the South African police service to do what it should be doing. But we do need to be careful how does this work out? Is Panyaza Lesufi creating a little vigilante army of his own? I'm interested to see that they're not armed yet, these people. I'm not sure if the LEAP officers are, but Panyaza wants to arm them. And when you train as a police officer, it's an extensive and intensive process. I'm not sure that I would be entirely happy in a structure where we don't know what the control mechanisms over the deployed wardens are. What is going to happen? Are they going to be just this kind of street committees that we remember from the ANC days during the struggle, which deteriorated into thuggish gangs headed and controlled by figures like Winnie Mandela, bumping off political opponents, extracting tribute, terrorizing the communities that they're supposed to be care for? We'll see what happens. It worries me. I see that on social media, the shots one sees of Panyaza's troops is that they're targeting so-called illegal foreigners. They're demanding stopping people in the streets, moving in big gangs, presumably because they're too afraid to move in single, because they're not single or on their own, or in couples because they are not armed, stopping people and demanding passports and identification. Well, that's absolutely outrageous. I mean, you don't have to carry a passport in South Africa. You don't have to carry a dompas in order to prove that you're allowed to be in the area. So what does Lesufi want? Is this just a vanity project, or is it a step forward? It'd be really great if he manages to reduce crime, but it's not a solution. There needs to be oversight. Whatever happens on the ground, we need to have a functioning police service. And not only a functioning police service, it's absolutely pointless having the police arrest people, and then the prosecutors are unable to jail them. And then, of course, when they are jailed, they can stick a corpse in the bed and disappear without anyone noticing. It's a structural decay that moves right from the policing to prisoning point.
Paul O'Sullivan dropped me a mail today where he's having a go at one of the former police commissioners who he helped Batlani to put into jail. And he made the point that in the last 10 years, murders in South Africa have gone up 62%, armed robberies up 38%. But last year, your chance of being convicted of murder was very low. 86% of murders went unsolved, 90% of armed robberies. Those are terrifying statistics. And is there anything that you're seeing on the horizon? I tried to give you a little ray of hope with the Western Cape, but the Keystone Cops in Gauteng are certainly offsetting that idea. Is there anything on the horizon where we could see some progress. And my point here is that whenever something that the state has fails, the private sector tends to step in. And we know there are 600,000 private cops, well, security guards, as against about 90,000 government-employed policemen. So those who can afford it are getting some measure of protection. But that isn't, again, likely to be a permanent solution.
I wonder if you want to take a step back from what the direct problem is of these malfunctioning institutions. We've been discussing three, but it can be applied to dozens of institutions in South Africa. And one of the key to me seems to be this thing of responsibility. There is never responsibility taken, and I don't know how any system can operate or hope to operate unless there's responsibility. You mentioned the previous police commissioner. I'm just thinking of Thiega, who was in charge when 44 people were shot dead in Marikana. Now, she never took responsibility. She was very harshly assessed by the Farlam Commission, but no disciplinary charges were brought. She was suspended on full pay for 5 years. There have been no prosecutions coming out of Marikana. We can take another thing, life in Sedimeni. We have 144 people died there. No one has yet been successfully prosecuted. I don't even think that the doctors who were implicated, the executive doctors who were running Gauteng Health at that time and who have been referred to the Health and Professional Council, I keep wanting to call them the SPCA, animals as they may be, the Health and Professional Council of South Africa, they have not yet instituted so there's no disciplinary procedures are ever followed. If they are, they're allowed to lapse. And without responsibility, without the minions being responsible to the section heads, responsible to the director generals, responsible to the minister, and the minister responsible to Ramaphosa, and Ramaphosa responsible to the constitution and the nation, none of those are functioning lines of responsibility. Ramaphosa doesn't take responsibility for anything. It's always apartheid's fault or history's fault or God knows what it is, imperialist forces gathering on the borders, but it is never anybody's fault who actually is the person who should be taking responsibility. If we want to solve policing, you have to start by firing the minister. This is a minister whom Zuma thought was corrupt. Now, if Zuma believes someone to be corrupt, I think it's a good sign he shouldn't be in the position he is. He's a terrible minister. Equally with the NPA, when you have 13.8% I think is 14% is a figure you cite, 14% successful prosecutions. How can Shamila Batoy sit in that job and not walk out the door and say to the president, "I'm sorry, I have failed abysmally," and she has failed abysmally. She's been given 5 years to sort out what she called the house burning down. So far, her contribution to the house burning down is to throw a cup of tea on it. It is not she has 9 key prosecutions, seminal she calls them. I think of them as nominal rather than seminal. She has 9 key prosecutions. The first one was dismissed 2 weeks ago, but the judge called it a comedy of errors. She was scathing in her assessment of it. Now, NPA is going to appeal that, and they're appealing it entirely out of vanity, not because there's a hope in hell of them succeeding in the appeal court. But every stage, the failures are tied to lack of responsibility. No society can operate without people taking responsibility for what they're supposed to be doing, and to be punished in some form for failing to do so. And we're a country where there's no responsibility. That's why we have vigilantes. That's why we have such a lawless society. It's because there is never any responsibility.
A country of no consequences. I guess there are consequences for those who happen to live in it. But again, I like to look for something on the upside. Shamila Batoy, when she came in, we were all terribly excited about what she was going to do. And is it Hermione Cronje, who was also brought in there, who has resigned some time ago, Not sure if she's been replaced, but indeed the track record thus far, even with support or help, one believes, from the private sector, has been pretty poor.
The explanation with the NPA until that we've generally accepted is that it had been so perverted to serve the cause of the Zuma state looting faction that it really couldn't do its job. But if that is the case, why have we seen no house cleaning at NPA? What has happened? Why are all these Zuma and Gupta sympathetic prosecutors not being cleaned out? Maybe it suits the government that such prosecutions fail. The Gupta extradition failed. We partly because the papers weren't drafted properly. In the Nulani trial, the one I was referring to earlier, where the judge called it a comedy of errors, it's interesting to me that the NPA I read the judgment, and it's not a particularly well written judgment. It is a very interesting judgment because she refers to several things. One aspect which hasn't been taken up in the media but really interested me was that there was testimony from several Deloitte's expert witnesses who had been involved in the investigation. When the court asked to see the original documents on which they had reached their conclusions of widespread corruption, they were unable to produce them because Deloitte has a 7-year rule and then it destroys all its documents. Now, that to me, it's so bizarre that one can only, that it inclines one immediately to conspiracy theories. How did Blois' prosecutors take this case to court without having checked even basic things like this? This is in a seminal case which is supposed to set the tone for all the other 8 critical cases of state corruption. It just shows either extraordinary incompetence from top to, it shows extraordinary incompetence from top to bottom.
Marcus Jooste must be relaxing with his bottle of whiskey on the side and just watching the show go by and think, well, what are the chances of me ever, A, being prosecuted and B, being successfully prosecuted with this kind of shambles?
I don't think Marcus Jooste has lost a night's sleep over the theoretical plight he is in. I think you're absolutely correct. One has to be... one of the comments of the judge in the Nulani case was that the only way that the NPA would have got a conviction is if the accused had actually got into the witness stand and admitted their guilt. The level of evidentiary, the quality of evidence put before the court was so poor that she said with great reluctance, I have to release these people. And
in a way, you're probably hoping that the Guptas don't come back to South Africa, because that would be quite a thing. But William, is it fixable?
I think we have to remain optimistic. I mean, partly we have to remain optimistic because one has no alternative. One does what one can, and one hopes that things will be fixable. I when I think about South Africa, I often think of a poem by Sheila Pugh, and she says, I don't know if you remember, sometimes things don't go after all from bad to worse. A people will sometimes step back from war. The sun will sometimes melt a field of sorrow that seemed hard frozen. And may that happen for you. And that's what we hope. May it happen for us. We've had luck running in our direction, and that happened in 94. We had a confluence of extraordinary international circumstances combining with great goodwill within South Africa, which was truly seminal in a way that the director of NPA doesn't understand what the word means. There's no reason that can't happen again, but I just don't. It becomes more and more difficult to reverse because there are more and more things to reverse. So where one has a rot initially at either the lower end or the top end of an organization, one now has a pervasive rot. How does a police officer not even be embarrassed to be sitting in a car with a gang leader and not to worry about what the consequences of that would be? They have no worry because the corruption, the destruction of the fiber and the spine of those organizations is almost complete. So it's like any medical problem. The longer we delay the treatment, the less likely the success and the more traumatic the treatment. So yes, it can be turned around. We talk all the time about tipping points. Societies can operate very well despite, let's put it this way, they not very well, but societies can survive. Zimbabwe survives. There are many people in Zimbabwe who live good lives. But can a society flourish? Can we flourish? Not in the immediate term. So we're looking at 5 to 10 years to pick up the pieces.
Well, we do have a national election coming next year. You made mention of that between May and June next year. William Saunderson-Meyer, we're going to be talking about that, I'm sure, next time. But thank you for updating us with your thoughts on the whole criminal situation in South Africa, or crime, legal criminal justice system. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.